Welcome to the Psych Ward Podcast, where we have conversations with everyday people about men. We believe that every man has an authentic version of himself, so we're on a mission. And that mission is to find an answer to one question. What does it mean to be a man? Welcome back to the Psych Ward Podcast, where we have real conversations about men with men. I am Eric Ward, and with me is a man who shaves his head but still somehow manages to have more gray hair than I do, Mr. Michael Lucas.
That's magic.
Mike, how are you?
I'm good. How you doing?
It's magic. That's the beard. That's what does it. Mike, for this episode, we're going to talk about military service. It's a topic that hits close to home for me. A couple of my closest friends are military veterans and combat veterans. Even closer to home, I have a daughter who is a Marine veteran. While I was preparing for this episode, I came across some interesting information. Not only is the percentage of Americans who join the military down, but the percentage of Americans who are eligible for military service is down. What I read said about 22% of U.S. citizens currently meet the eligibility criteria, compared to about 30% just 8 years ago. Several reasons that they mentioned, but the biggest, not shockingly, seems to be their inability to meet the physical requirements. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention point directly to obesity as the main factor for military ineligibility. They said about 1 in 3 young adults is too overweight to join any branch of the military, even the Air Force. And they report that 1 in 3 young adults just simply can't cut it physically. Being fat is, of course, something that I know nothing about, being the fine specimen of in-shaptitude that I am. All that being said, just about 2 million Americans are in the military at any given time. And it sounds like a ton, but it's actually only 0.7% of the population that's actively serving. And when you dig a little bit deeper, there's an interesting breakdown for those numbers. Out of that 0.7% who are serving, 1.3% are in the Marines, 2.3% in the Coast Guard, 24% in the Air Force, just over 20% in the Navy, and a whopping 50.9% are in the U.S. Army. And speaking of the Army, joining us today is Jack Amberg. Jack is a retired lieutenant colonel from the Army. I will ask him to introduce himself, but what I know is that he's a veteran of, I believe, somewhere around 28 years in the United States Army. Could be wrong.
26 years.
26. I was giving you a little bit more credit. He's been a regular guest on WGN News, providing expert analysis of the Russia-Ukraine war and other international conflicts. He's previously honored by the governor of Illinois, even though he left us and our fine state to go to Colorado as Veteran of the Month. Jack, thanks for coming on.
You got it. And just FYI, here in Colorado, when I moved here, we had to sign a document that we promised to give up humidity and mosquitoes. So that's one of the things that had to happen.
2 more reasons not to like you.
It's about love, baby. It's about love.
So I understand congratulations are in order. You and your wife just became grandparents again twice.
Yep, second and third times. Our second grandchild was born August 11th, because my birthday is August 12th, so it's the day before my birthday. And then our third grandchild was born August 28th, so we had a wonderful August. And enjoying the new folks in the family. It is amazing. If I can just, we'll step down the road, that when you look at a brand new baby, man, that'll remind you what's actually important. Are all them fingers and toes in place, right? Are the eyes bopping around, right? Can they poop, right? That's what's important. All the other stuff that we kind of blow up and worry about, if that little baby is healthy, right? And now, if they're not healthy, then that's when you got to go to work. But if they're healthy, that's what's important in life. And by the way, the baby smell is still alive and well. And it's one of the most awesome physical experiences you can have.
That's true.
The top of the head smell.
Yeah.
So Jack, tell us about you.
Yep. So, wow, let's see. We'll probably start the easiest way. I graduated high school in 1981, so I'm an old guy. Went off to play football at USC, but that would not be Southern California. It'd be Southern Colorado. It was in Pueblo, Colorado. Today they're called Colorado State University at Pueblo. But I got mixed up in drugs, sex, and rock and roll, ended up dropping out, went back home to Lakewood, Colorado, was a teamster during the day, coached football in the afternoon, and was a bouncer in a bar at night. My dad caught up with me. He said, you know what? You're not living in my house like this. I'm not supporting your lifestyle. You're a grown man. Take care of yourself. So I was getting thrown out of the house and I had this addiction to food. So I enlisted because I really wasn't sure what else I was going to do. As an enlisted guy, I showed up at Fort Knox, and I'll be very honest, about the third day, I figured out this makes sense. That guy can tell me what to do, and that guy can't because they got it on their collar. They either have more rank than me or they don't. Pretty much black and white. So I enjoyed that, but then I found out as I was going through all the training and so on, I wasn't good enough to be enlisted, so they sent me to West Point. At West Point, I graduated in 1988. Now, I'll toss you a bone on this one. So I graduated high school in 88. I got a fairly decent baccalaureate in 88. So it took me 7 years, 81 to 88, 7 years to get a 4-year degree. I would offer to you that not all the flowers bloom in the spring. Sometimes the flower blooms in the fall. Don't freak out if you're not blooming in the spring. Anyway, ended up doing 21 more years active duty and retired in 2008 there in Naperville, Illinois. Last job I had was the Director of Army Public Affairs Midwest, downtown Chicago, telling the soldier story. Since then, I worked for the Robert R. McCormick Foundation. Was there for about 3.5 years with a whole team of folks, raised and gave away about $18.5 million for veterans on behalf of veterans. Then joined a bank, became a loan officer, and specialized in VA loans. Brought that out here to Colorado Springs in 2021, and now I am a civil servant. I work for Ginnie Mae, and I continue to help the process to make sure that folks can realize the American dream.
Good for you. One of the things I always remember in previous conversations with you was the number of times you reminded me that when we talk about soldiers, when we write the word down, we write it with a capital S. What's the theory behind that?
I think we should.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, in the Marines, everything is done like that because Marine is a noun. Okay. I think soldiers should be sailors, airmen, Coast Guardsmen, and don't forget your merchant mariners. I think it should always be capitalized because when those people volunteer to do it, they're doing something. And I don't know if I'm using the right word. You got the PhD, so you can correct me here, but it's anti-cultural because it's not about themselves. It's about something bigger. Someone has given them values. You gave it to your daughter that says that I need to go out and worry about something that's bigger than me, more important than me, and causes me to do things that may be a little bit uncomfortable.
So it sounds like more reasons than that, but one of the primary reasons you joined the Army was you weren't really sure what you were going to do next. Is that a common thing?
It is actually very common. One of the things that is a common thread, and I don't have any percentages, but is a common thread is that when people go into the military, there's a couple of directions. One thing is it provides structure. Okay, now depending on where you come from, you'll have certain values, and we have subcultures within our overall culture. Inner city, for example, where the culture may be a little bit different than what the overall culture is. In other words, the family unit and things like that are broke down. So you have different sets of values. When you join the Army, one of two things happens. You either adopt the values of the Army or the military, or you don't adopt those values. Now, you may have the values before you come in, but if you don't have those values, they're going to send you back home. But if you adopt the values, then generally speaking, what happens is in adopting those values, you also adopt the structure, the discipline, and so on. Example, I talk to veterans all the time when they first get out. Go ahead and schedule your day. Here's breakfast. Here's when I do my exercise. Here's when I'm going job hunting, right? And schedule your day. You're used to having a written schedule. There's nothing wrong with having a written schedule to schedule your day. But then You if you adopt those values, you go off and you make something of yourself. You might spend a career in it. You take the education benefits. Move on from there. You learn skill sets. But at the end of the day, if you adopt those values, you generally are more successful than the folks who did not adopt the values.
Can you give us a couple of examples of what those values are and maybe how they're different from the civilian population?
Sure. In the military, one of the things you want to do is tell the truth, because the means are everything. It's how you're getting things done. Okay. One of the things we say is we always said was you got to do the harder right rather than the easier wrong. And I think the culture overall, what it's trying to teach people is as long as you win, it doesn't matter, right? Just get to the end state, get to the win, and tells you what kinds of things are important. And maybe partying all the time, or being scantily clad. I'm thinking of the ads today are always sexualized and all that. And all that stuff is important, when in the military, it's not that important. Yeah, I get it. Young guys and gals are going to go out and party on the weekend, but what they're trying to emphasize is you take care of each other, that you have an obligation for that guy or gal on your left and right. And I know that I've had neighbors who didn't care what they did, reference left and right, and others who did. And it's as simple as that. You either, again, in the military, you adopt the values of taking care of those on your left and right, or you don't.
As a counselor, Jack, I've had the opportunity to work with a number of veterans, including some combat veterans. And one of the things I'd like to get into with you is just how uncommon that actually is for non-military counselors to work with soldiers and other veterans. But what you're saying reminds me of a client that I was working with. He had done 3 tours in Afghanistan, and he was a Marine, and I forget something. Force Recon, is that a job title?
Yes,
Sounds familiar.
yes. For the
Um,
Marines, yeah.
so he was the guy that he and his team went out ahead of the rest of the group and basically were whacking the weeds and searching and making sure that everything was safe for everybody to move forward. And it was interesting because when he came back, he was struggling, just to, like many veterans do, just to kind of reincorporate into society, and in particular struggling with his family, young child, and
Mm-hmm.
his wife had kind of told him, like, hey, if you go back there again, you've gone back voluntarily twice now. And if you go back there again, I don't know that I can keep doing this. And he was struggling with that. And one of the things he kept saying is just how close he was to the other guys in his squad, because literally their lives depended on each other. And he said, I can't look to the left and the right. I just have to watch my area. And I've got these guys next to me who, if they don't do their job, I could die. And the same goes for me. And he was struggling just to, I think, find that same sense of importance in what he was doing when he came back home.
One of the things, and you are, Mike, if I understand right, you're also a PhD in psychology, correct?
Masters.
Masters. Got it. At the end of the day, y'all know what happens when you get a massive amount of fear into your body, right? It physically does, right?
Mm-hmm.
It releases all those endorphins and all that kind of stuff, right? So how do you find that again in the civilian world? So that can be an area where guys and gals, it's tough to come back, because what's going to give you that exhilaration,
Right.
right? We all have felt it. That's why we go to haunted houses at Halloween. So somebody scares us and we get that shot of adrenaline. Nothing compared to somebody throwing a bullet at you. Okay. And if the counselors never had a bullet thrown at them, they'll never understand that. But again, from an individual perspective, that's one thing they're looking at. Next thing they're looking at that may cause the trouble when you say coming back. And I call it the sheepdog mentality. So at the end of the day, what does a sheepdog do? And I'm not trying to play stump the chump, but what's a sheepdog supposed to do?
Protect the sheep, herd the sheep.
Protect the sheep. Well, they herd the sheep. Protecting is a secondary function. So protection is there. So what we did in the military was we protected the good guys from the bad guys. Now, honest to God, in the big picture, we didn't care what they wore on their head or what their eye shape was or their skin color. It was good guys and bad guys. Pretty much that was it. So the good guys were the sheep. So the issue is when we're coming back home is how does the sheepdog tell the sheep that the wolf makes him nervous? Because the sheep's not going to understand that. The family are sheep. In that discussion, you don't want to tell your family that you're nervous about something, because that dishonors the service, and also it'll make the sheep nervous. That's what you're thinking in your head, because that's where you're going. I actually had I can't remember. It was one of the smaller suburbs there in Chicago. The deputy police chief, called me, and they had an issue because they had a father who got beat up by his son, who was a Marine who had been in the Battle of Fallujah. Fallujah was really a two-way shooting gallery. And in this discussion with him, I was asking him questions. So we got the dad, and they wanted me to talk to him. And so I asked Dad, what service were you in? And he wasn't. Because what he was doing was he was bugging his son, going, "Son, tell me about what happened." Now he's thinking, I'm Dad. I have to take care of my son. It's a fatherly instinct. His son, who's a Marine, been through the Battle of Fallujah, now sees Dad as a sheep. I got to take care of you. I protect you. You don't protect me. I protect you. And the kid would never tell him. And so they got into it, and the kid beat the crap out of his father because, at some point, right, that's what happens with a fit young man and, an older dad. And so in that discussion, and I didn't mean to, but Dad ended up crying when he finally realized that the son had changed, and it's okay. Now, there was another one. We were living there in Naperville, and there was a young man who was MOS would be a 13. MOS is a job description, a job skill set. And he was 11 Bravo. That's an infantryman. And of course, in Iraq and all of that stuff, Afghanistan, those are insurgencies. So we'd fought things like that before. But his parents had called me, and they were worried because they couldn't communicate with it and couldn't help him, and he couldn't adapt, and he couldn't, do all that. And all they could do was talk about what they can't do. So I got a hold of him, and we went to the local VFW. And he was an 11 Bravo, so I introduced him to 11 Bravo from Saigon and another 11 Bravo, older guy from Seoul. Now, the key was I said 11 Bravo, because the key is you want to create that connection, because what's a kid see? Right? Kid sees a couple of guys with gray hair. But I said 11 Bravo. Got him talking, walked away, came back in 45 minutes, and they were laughing. And when I moved, they were still in touch. But the key was that they had talked, and they found out that they had common experiences. The food sucked, the officers were idiots, and their boots didn't fit, right? That was so. So then the kid finally had another sheepdog to say, how the hell do you do this? How do you come back? Because those guys have already been through all that stuff. So a tremendous way to do that is to set things like that up. There was a study then also at Jesse Brown, and they looked at the decision models. So in theater, troops, and that would be a soldier, sailor, airman, Marines, or a merchant mariner who's taking the stuff. And that's what they did at Desert Storm. They were floating back and forth and eligible to be attacked. But when they were doing all of that stuff, how many decisions does the average guy or gal make on a daily basis? And the number's around 3,000. So then you compare that to a civilian lifestyle. How many decisions does a civilian make on a daily basis? And it's between 9,000 and 10,000. And you might think, well, that's crazy, Jack. How could it? Well, think about it. Where do you eat your food as a civilian? Where you're driving down the street, you might stop at, a different fast food burger joint, or maybe it's tacos today, or maybe where in the military you're eating at the dining facility, or you're eating really when you're deployed on a FOB, forward operating base. You're eating out of a brown bag. It's an MRE. That's what you get. If you have to drive somewhere in the military, when you're deployed in the combat theater, they're going to give you the route on how you're going to drive there. So you don't get to choose that kind of stuff. You don't choose if you're going to shave in the morning. That's not a choice you make. Now, operators, special operators, we've all seen the guys with the horses, they didn't shave because they had to fit in, but they were a different breed. I'm talking about the average guy or gal when they're coming back. And so they have, and we've read about it, the guy or gal comes back and they're overwhelmed, just completely overwhelmed because they're not used to making all those decisions. I used to tell people when they come back, don't say, oh, and I'm, Eric, I'll just use you. Eric, welcome back. We're so happy to have you. Where do you want to go to dinner? Don't do that. They've been eating at the DFAC. But if Eric liked pizza when he left, he likes pizza now. Eric, get in the car. We leave at 6 for pizza. He'll get in the car, right? Because he'll ramp those decisions up, all right? He'll ramp those decisions up, but it takes him a while to do that. When he first gets back, he's not used to doing that. By the way, the study showed in Garrison, so if you're at your installation, say you're at Fort Cavazos, and if you haven't heard of that, that's what Fort Hood used to be. So if you're living there, you're making about $6,000 a day. Because again, your uniform, right? What do you wear every day? Well, I just put on my uniform. It's not a decision. It's not something I've got to worry about. The other one, let's see, the decision, the sheepdog, and the excitement. I think I've talked about all those, right? The adrenaline. So those are reasons they may not come back. Now, again, the spouse, right? Woman or man, because women are warriors. Don't kid yourself for a second. Women are warriors, and I can get into that if you'd like to. But at the end of the day, when they come back, they don't necessarily want to share it with their spouse because the spouse, again, is a sheep. They would protect them. And so they don't want to talk about it. Now, you might say, well, how'd they do it back in World War II, Jack? Well, in World War II, they sat on a boat for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Trying to float back. So they had someone to talk to. When they had someone to talk to, post-traumatic stress, everybody gets post-traumatic stress at some point. It's whether it becomes a disorder, that's a completely different story. And so if you can talk about it. In the current way things work now, you could be in fact, we had gone to O'Hare. I was with a group of folks. We were welcoming back a young troop. And he came out and everybody started cheering and threw confetti and he turned around to run. Of course, he'd come through security. He can't run back in there. I went over and grabbed him because what nobody understood is that 24 hours before, it's 24 to 36 hours before, he was in a outdoor market, where a suicide bomber had ignited the bomb, right? And so now you got confetti. Well,
wow, triggers,
right? And it takes time to process that. And you got to have somebody to talk to. So when you say they're coming back and having trouble, those could be 3 reasons that they're having trouble.
I worked with a soldier once who was in Iraq during the first war, and his team was the one, and I have no idea, I don't remember what the terminology was, but they were the ones who were going into Kuwait, into those oil fields that the Iraqi soldiers had lit on fire as they were retreating. And, we had kind of bombed them into oblivion, and his job was to go in and make sure that they were dead. Mm-hmm. And to the day that I saw him, this was years ago, he can't pump gas in his car. Mm-hmm. His wife has to do it for him because mm-hmm. the fumes remind him, the smell just causes flashbacks.
Wow.
And Jack, the veterans that I've worked with, it takes a long time for them to get into the details, and I'm sure I don't hear 1,000th of what they experienced, but when they do, like as a non-military guy, it takes everything in my power not to like bug my eyes out and go, you what? Like, how did that happen? I can't believe it. It's so unreal to those of us who aren't there to listen to them describe the death and the destruction and the fear.
For the past 15 years, I've been working with people coming out of prison. They come out the same way. They haven't had to make a decision in however many years, and they have the same struggle as you described veterans do with getting overwhelmed with all the decisions and the life stuff they have to take care of when they come out. And another parallel is substance abuse clients often shy away from counselors who don't have a history of substance abuse. I would say the majority of the people I've worked with prefer working with counselors who've had substance abuse issues, probably for the same reason that you described with the sheep.
So, Mike, it's so funny that you say that. Years and years ago, rather early in my career, I worked in a methadone clinic, all heroin addicts, and these were not casual users. These were hardcore, shooting up in the alley kind of heroin addicts. And invariably, every one of them asked me, like, oh, like, when did you use? How much did you use? How long have you been clean? And I never lied to them. And I'm one of those exceptionally odd people who's never even used marijuana. I've never done an illegal drug in my life and didn't have my first drink of alcohol till I was 22. So here I am in my mid 20s trying to do counseling with these hardcore addicts. And they would, as soon as I said, like, oh, I never used, they would dismiss me, right? Because you have nothing to offer me. And it took me a while to figure out. And finally, what I started when they would ask me, like, oh, how long have you been clean, or what did you use? I would always turn the question around, and I would say some version of, are you coming here to this treatment clinic because you want to trade war stories about using, or are you coming here to get clean and learn how to live a sober life? And, oh, I'm here to get clean. Well, that's what I'm an expert in. You're an expert in using, right? I'm an expert in living clean and sober. And I think in that environment, it worked. That type of response and approach worked. Working with veterans, I picked up, especially combat veterans, I picked up pretty quick that I was never going to try anything like that, and I was going to shut my mouth and listen and let them lead the conversation.
When if I remember right, you used to work also with police officers, correct?
Yeah, still do.
So I would offer to you, police officers are in combat every day, and so they're very, very similar. And they want to have somebody. Being shot at is a unique experience, and if you haven't been shot at, if you haven't had a weapon aimed at you, you don't understand it, right? And if you've ever played paintball with people, you'll know when you get shot with a paintball, your heart's really beating. I mean, that's just a friggin' paintball, okay? So you've got to you're seeking out people who have that similar experience to find out how they may have dealt with it, because those people would understand you. We actually started here in Colorado from back in my high school, a bunch of guys who we're all fellow veterans. We had one veteran who had committed suicide. And we all vowed, and so we see each other at least quarterly. We text, we call, so that nobody thinks they're alone with any of the thoughts or feelings they have, because there's tremendous amounts of guilt, and it's not always that guilt that I killed somebody, it's guilt that I came back and they didn't.
Jack, why do you think military and veteran suicide rates are so high now as compared to previous years?
I think ultimately it has to do with they have more problems going into the military when it comes to feelings than they do coming out, or than they did before. So let's see, how do I do this? There was a story I'd read about. It happened about 15 years ago. It was at the Naval Academy, and they were lacrosse players. And this is in Annapolis, Maryland, and it was a sleety, nasty, 38-degree ice is forming on your mask kind of weather. And the guy's writing the story, and he's saying that all of a sudden the coach blows the whistle really, really loud. All right, cool. He's thinking he's going to call off practice. Everybody runs over to the coach, and the coach starts laying into him. Listen, you're having a miserable practice. I don't care that the weather is miserable and you feel miserable. And by the way, nobody else does either, nor will your opponents. And where I'm going with that is feelings have become way, way, way more important, rather than learning how to deal with our feelings. We force everybody else to deal with them. I was a Tony Robbins fan for many years, and to this day, I still, to make sure I got my feelings, flip on the shower, I walk into the water. I do not wait for it to get warm. It's just cold. It's just a feeling. It feels cold. It's not going to kill me. It's not going to give me a heart attack. It's not going to break any bones. It's just cold. And what I'm trying to do is make sure that I'm always, I got my feelings. My feelings don't run me. But I think that has a lot to do with, the feelings. The other part is, and I guess I would compare it to wiggling a sore tooth, having that confidence to say to another sheepdog, dude, I'm not doing well. I really need, I need some of your time. I got this stuff on my mind. And if you can't do that, you're left with internalizing it. And then I think it's okay to say we all start adding meaning to stuff that doesn't need more meaning, right? We create stories in our head, and we create all kinds of stuff that's a bunch of foo-foo, but we believe it because it's in our head and we have no way to talk to.
That's a lot of the work I do with my clients, is getting them okay with having difficult feelings. They're uncomfortable with difficult feelings.
And helping them manage their feelings, I think, is the right way to do it, not get everybody else to manage their feelings, if I can. But one of the things I used to say all the time, and I still believe this, is, and we're talking about it, this finally talking about post-traumatic stress. I mean, it's been around since man's been around, right? If you knew anybody that's ever had a car accident, they probably, and it was serious, they don't want to go back to that corner where the car accident happened. That's post-traumatic stress. But we would never talk about it. And yet I think, correct me if I'm wrong, it's an injury to your emotions. Am I right with that?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. So if it's an injury to your emotions, well, let's see. I've had a knee reconstruction, blew my knee playing football, and we would talk about that in a heartbeat, right?
Sure.
No problem. But if I told you I wanted to kill my cat and wear the fur, maybe you're going to walk away from me at a cocktail party.
Quickly.
You don't really want to talk to me about it. See what? So we have an opportunity, and we should be using this to finally start talking, and not just military. There's a lot of people, right? Assaults, robberies, there's all kinds of stuff, right? Stuff happens. I mean, bad stuff happens. I don't need to get into details. I'm sure you guys know more about that than I do. But maybe it's time to finally allow people to talk about it and not walk away from it. Now, they got to talk to the right people.
Jack, you mentioned earlier about women being warriors and being on the tail end of raising my third daughter. I'm well aware of that maybe warrior type mentality that I think all girls are born with, because frankly, they're just mean, especially when they're teenagers. But I think part of what I'm always curious about is, for kind of the old school military men like you, what's the perception of women in the military, women in combat for most men? And part of the curiosity for me is, we've talked about this, I'm a very conventional guy. And I always think that part of my job is to protect women. And I think if I was a military guy, and maybe it would be trained out of me at that point, who knows, but I would struggle with having fellow soldiers who are women. And I would find it distracting because of that maybe questionable mentality about feeling like I needed to protect them.
The protector.
Yeah.
So the first thing I'll say is, let's remember that women have a higher pain threshold than men. That's why God lets them have the babies. Okay.
He lets them.
Men, if men had to have babies, there would be no human population. To my comment on women being warriors, what I would love to do, and you can Google this, you go back to the Time magazine. There was a Time magazine cover, and this is back when I was in the Army as a public affairs officer. And as I understood it went down, the year it was Desert Storm, where they had all the embedded reporters. So way back then. What Time magazine had said is, we'll make the service member the person of the year. And they had a soldier, sailor, airman, Marine, Coast Guardsman for the picture. But if you look at that picture, and you should look at it sometime, look at the person in the middle. Now, they're all wearing helmets, and they're all wearing their BDUs, and they all have their combat rattle on, but the person in the middle is a woman. And as I understand it, she was escorting a reporter, and there was a firefight, and she's holding an artery closed with one hand on him keeping him alive, and engaging the enemy with a rifle in her other hand.
Wow.
And when he told that story, Time Magazine said, we'll make the soldier the person of the year. And I can't remember what year that did that. Eric, if you find that, right, again, Time Magazine, I don't know if you can share the screen. I guess I didn't know we were going to go down that, or I would have had the picture ready for you. But it's a Time Magazine Soldier Person of the Year. Yeah. So look at the person in the middle. And I don't know if you can share the screen. I don't know. Is this podcast? Can people do the audio? So look at the person in the middle. That's a woman, right? And by the way, when wearing it is immaterial if you're a woman or a man. They ask me, what do guys think? What do the modern day troops think? I can only give you my experience. And it's as simple as this. If you complain and whine and moan, we're going to harass the living crap out of you. If you don't, we're going to help you. Remember what I said before. We got to help that guy or gal next to us on our right or left. My own experience when I was going to West Point during the plebe summer, they would call it Beast Barracks, and you did a lot of walking through the woods, and we carried a lot of stuff. Well, there was an old M60 machine gun, and it was called the Pig because that thing was heavy. It was extremely heavy. I don't have the exact poundage, but it was heavy. We had a young woman. She was a cadet, and she was like 98 pounds. And the upperclassmen picked her to carry the Pig. And we're on this patrol, and she is struggling. You can see it. I mean, she sweat so much, the sweat is squirting off of her, and she can barely breathe, and she's grunting, and it's just, but she never complained. And so we grabbed it from her, gave her a smaller weapon, and we took care of it. Now, if you're a guy and you start complaining about it, or it doesn't matter, we're not going to help you. If you start whining and moaning and bitching, you're not going to get help. But part of that taking care of the guy or gal on the left, when you see somebody stumbling, you help them and get them steadied. And if you've got to carry some of their gear, you'll do that because you know they'll do the same thing for you. And so that's my experience with how men see women. If they can do it, then do it. And I'll cover your back. Now, you don't need to change the standards, okay? But it is what it is.
Yeah, and I think along the same lines, I guess that kind of has me curious about what characteristics make somebody likely to succeed in the military?
Having
Broad brush, I know.
You understand, I suffer from ADHD, right? Adult Attention Deficit Syndrome. What are the top 3 professions for attention deficit syndrome? Military, law enforcement, and sales, right? So, right?
Therapist after that.
I guess so. If you can get them to sit still long enough. So characteristics. How do I? The values again: honesty, right? Loyalty, because you're loyal to everybody else. But you've got to have this innate ability somehow. I don't know how to explain it. That once you've made up your mind to do something, you're going to do it. If it's a 15-mile road march, I'm going to do it. Now, I may be in a ton of pain when I'm done. If I didn't break in my boots properly, I may have shredded my feet. But you make up your mind to do it, and then you do it. It's as simple as that. People were saying to me, well, I could have made it through West Point. Sure you could have if you made up your mind to do it. And I think I said before, it's all about love, right? So if I can, I'm going to walk down that path, because if you have any belief in Christ at all, don't tell me Christ hung on that cross because it felt good. He did it because he loved us. And love is not about feelings, Jack's opinion. Love is an act of will. So you've got to have that ability to have that act of will. Now, you may not have it initially, because part of what the drill sergeants would do, for example, is piss you off so much that you say, I'm going to show you, I'm going to do this. Think of Herb Brooks and Play Your Game, and how he taught those college hockey players take on the greatest hockey team potentially, at least at that time in the history of hockey. Grown men, right? Remember, grown men muscles are harder than young man muscles. They can be the same size. but they're just harder, right? Because as you get older, but Herb Brooks had them so pissed off at him that they were going to do anything to show him they could do it. And so you get this innate ability in your mind that says, I set my mind to something, I'm going to do it. And then you do it. I often actually refer to veterans as being too stupid to fail, which does mean also if you want to take on the plumbing leak underneath your sink and you don't know what you're doing, you may well create a mess because you're too stupid to fail. You grab the wrench anyway and you give it your best shot.
No, that's what YouTube is for.
There you go.
Jack, you and I had a conversation once when my daughter was in the Marines. I don't know if you remember it or not, but we had been out to visit her at Camp Pendleton. And I had read about it before we went, but until you go and see it, it doesn't really comprehend. Camp Pendleton is a city. It's however many hundreds of thousands of acres, and there's apartment buildings and houses and strip malls and everything else. And it's not quite like any other city, because sometimes you'll be driving down the road and you have to stop because there's tanks crossing the road in front of you. So a little different than living in the suburbs of Chicago. But one of the things there were two things that really stuck out to me while we were there. One of them was I fell into, as we're driving around and spending a few days there with her, thinking, oh, there's like young teenage boys washing their cars and motorcycles in the parking lot of the apartment complex and listening to music and goofing off, and they're chasing girls and they're doing this. And this is no different. The military, the Marines are no different than anywhere else you go in the country. And then I was sitting in the car waiting for my wife and daughters to come out of the store. And a Marine went walking past me, and he was limping because he had a prosthetic leg and yet was still in service. And I'm like, well, okay, now I know how this is different, right? Like this is a whole different sort of thing. But the conversation you and I had when we got back was, I think I was a little shocked, because it seemed to me that in the Marines, at least, and I don't know how other branches of the military are, but in the Marines, it seemed like every Marine was at one end or the other of a spectrum. On one end of the spectrum is I will kill you with a toothpick if I have to defend my country and the people that live in it. Soldiers, warriors, trained, who are loyal and hardworking and are there to do their job with integrity. And at the other end of the spectrum were a bunch of what appeared to me to be goof-offs who were lost and didn't really know what they wanted out of life. And they had the sort of non-traditional combat roles, and just, I think it gave me the impression of people who wanted to be in the Marines so they could say they were in the Marines. Mm. And there didn't seem to be anything in between. I don't know if you remember that conversation or not, but I was a little shocked by that.
I don't remember the conversation, but yeah, there is a whole spectrum of folks, once they're in the military. If I can be so bold, I'm going to bring up one of my classmates from West Point. His name happens to be Eric Carilla. It would be General Eric Carilla. He's currently in command of CENTCOM.
Nice.
Oh.
Okay, so he's the 4-star general in charge of CENTCOM. Okay, so this guy was on the rugby team. Okay, he also probably had over 200 disciplinary hours at West Point. If you get busted, like your bed's not made, right? They give you disciplinary hours. He had over 200 of them. And when we went back for a reunion, they put a letter up on the wall from, I think it was a Hilton manager, that they will never let cadets stay there again because rooms had been destroyed. Rugby team, Eric Carilla and those guys. Now he's a 4-star general, and he is one of the most brilliant people I have ever met. If you ever met him, I mean, he's one of those guys, when he walks in the room, you know it, right?
Yeah.
He just has a presence about him. By the way, as a battalion commander, he was in a firefight in an alley in Baghdad, and took a round to his femur that shattered it. And so he has a titanium femur.
Oh.
As I understand, I think that's all okay to say because it's all in the public news, except maybe his hours. But they, at the end of the day, so when you look at the goof offs, they may be goofing off when you see them, but they've got that innate, as I said, will once they've made up their mind. And if they've made up their mind, they're going to take care of the guy and gal on their left. you might want them around you when the bullets fly.
Yeah. Have you noticed that there seems to be and I was reading about this just because I kept hearing about it. Of course, I got curious and started digging into the research, but the percentage of young men and women in the military who are coming out on some form of disability, is that something that from your experience is higher or?
I haven't seen those stats, but when you were talking before about one of the height weight things, so you can actually Google it, this just came out 2 days ago. The Air Force did hit their recruiting goals because they tweaked their body fat standards and their tattoo policy. And I remember one time I lived across the street from a playground, okay? And there were some kids blowing some fireworks off there. And it was not at that time, not a good time. And they weren't really doing it safe. So I walked up to them, and of course they all, chested up to me like I was going to do something. And I said, yeah, I'm not going to tell you Ken, I can't do this, and I'm not calling the cops on you. But if somebody does call the cops on you, understand this is what happens. You get arrested, you now are no longer qualified to go in the military. Now, I'm not trying to get you to go in the military either. But do you want to forfeit that free decision you could make to go in or not go in by doing what you're doing now? They picked up their toys and went home.
Yeah.
Which was what my intent was. Rather than try to, hit them with blunt force trauma, I just tried to hit them with reasoning, because at the end of the day, if you want to go in the military, go. It's a volunteer force. If you don't want to, then don't. But if you're not making wise decisions, overeating and not being active being one of them, okay, committing crimes, then you're not even qualified, and you've removed from your kit bag, if I can use that, ability to make that decision to go into the military on your own. You just wiped it off, because they're going to tell you no, because you don't qualify. You want to go do drugs? You don't qualify. You're not going to make it. It's not even on the table.
Are the days of sending people to the military to turn them around, are those days over?
As I understand it, yes, the judges can't sit there and go, you either do this or I'll send you in the military. I don't believe that's in place anymore. I know when I was enlisting, there was a misunderstanding with the judge. Instead of going in the Air Force, I went in the Army. It's a whole nother story for another podcast. But there was a day when that's what they did. Now, we reached very, very low with standards to meet recruiting goals during Vietnam. But we've really got to sit back as a culture and as a society, and we really have to scratch our heads and go, what happens if a generation doesn't step up? What happens if they don't volunteer? We're fighting wars with the volunteer service. We have people that don't like us and would like to see us go away. China, Russia, two big ones. Iran would love for us to go away. So if there's bad people that want to get rid of us, what happens if we don't have folks step up? And part of what happens, back to what I was talking about with the, that innate will and so on, left and right, is one of the thoughts is also, well, if I don't do it, who's going to? Well, I don't want somebody else to fight my fight for me, right? So I don't want somebody else to have to do what I should have done.
You talked about being in the military and officers being idiots and boots don't fit. What are maybe a couple of things that, for those of us who never were in the military and all we know of it is what people have told us or what we've seen in movies, which is probably unreliable. But what are some things that might surprise people about serving in the military, and maybe even taking it a step further about being in combat?
I really can't run down that because I've not actually been in combat. Okay, I've read about it. I have had bullets shot at me and a couple of scuds when I was leaving after Desert Storm, but I have not actually been in a firefight. So I've got to defer that one to people who would actually know. What I guess would be, here's probably the biggest difference in the military compared to the civilian world, and that's the use of the word no. So in the civilian world, especially in the business world, we don't say no. We say, Eric, that's a great point. Man, I love what you're asking, but let me tell you what I can do, right? Mike, you're on it, but maybe we should go this direction. Where in the military, you have a legal, moral obligation to take care of the people and equipment. So no, you can't do that. No is a huge word. And when I say, take care of the people and equipment, remember Private Ryan.
Right.
Saving Private Ryan. He's up. Remember, he's at the battalion. And the guy said, "Man, I'm so sorry about your company. It wasn't my company. It was the Army's company. And of course, the Army belongs to the American people. People come up to me and say, thank you for your service. You've heard what I answer that with. Thank you for paying for it, because that's what the American people are paying for. And that's what I think we're losing in the culture. You talk about how few people are in. The American people are paying for this military. They should demand the absolute best from it, in my humble opinion, and demand that the best leaders lead that military.
Are we getting the absolute best?
Oh, I don't know if I'm in position to answer that one, because I'm not in those positions to make those calls. I know we've got some. I just mentioned one of them, right? Eric Carilla. I know he's one of the greatest military minds I've ever met. Okay, so I know for a fact he's one of the greatest. I know the chief of staff of the Army. We were friends, same companies. Absolutely freaking brilliant. More important, that guy was so impassioned, in love with being an infantryman in the Army. My heavens, who else do you want to be chief staff of the Army? But a guy who, and I'll be honest, I wasn't that excited about being an infantryman to put 65 pounds on my back and walk 15 miles every day. Right? I was an artilleryman. I'd rather get in the vehicle and ride. I don't think I'd be out of line. He would rather sit with a bunch of infantrymen in the woods and just be with them, I think, than anything else. And that's Randy George. Again, with my company when I was at West Point, he's chief staff of the Army. So we have some brilliant people. Andy Pappas runs Joint Forces Command. Absolutely brilliant. Ron Clark just got picked up for his fourth. He's going to be U.S. Army Pacific. Absolutely brilliant people. But when you ask me across the board on leadership, are they the best? I don't know. I can tell you the people I know, yeah, right? And I know these people. They're the best. I can't tell you all the rest of them.
I was always fascinated by the people that I had a neighbor when I was growing up. He served, I think, 2 terms in Vietnam as a tunnel rat. And I always wondered, is it the skill level that keeps people alive, or is it luck? I also have a good friend who is, I believe, in Iraq, Afghanistan. He served in special forces, and it's like he's invincible, sort of like a superhero to me. And so I've always wondered, is this a luck thing when people serve in combat more than once and they come out alive? And it just always fascinates me.
I don't know if I could put it in luck. I was just trying to remember the name of the sniper, the famous sniper that they made the movie about. And he had done all those tours because he wanted to get that one other sniper and he wanted to make sure he got him. And so he was never killed during, I think it was 6 combat tours, but he comes back and I thought he got shot when he was trying to help veteran, by a veteran.
Oh.
So I don't know if I don't believe in predestiny. People make decisions. We deal with the repercussions of our decisions. I do know when you look at the special operators, and this would I would go back to Dick Cheney making the statement way back when. Well, we need to increase the size of our special operations force. Man, those are unique people.
Yeah.
Those are phenomenally unique people. That you don't rattle them. They really don't get too high. They don't get too low, but they're good.
Yeah.
They're so good at what they do. Right? The movie about when they went in and got Bin Laden. That's what I mean. Whether it's SEALs or Green Beret or the Air Force guys who go behind the lines to go get their pilots and bring them out. I mean, those special operators, those are unique people, and not everybody has a mindset. If I understand right, way back when Tiananmen Square, you two are old enough to remember Tiananmen Square.
Mm-hmm.
We had human beings watching that happen. That's how we knew what was going on. And the human beings, I think it's okay to say, I hope so, but I met one and I'm like, how do you get out of there? Oh, I'm carrying $1 million. Because most countries are carrying $1 million. If they get into trouble, it's easier to bribe your way out than shoot your way out. So just put that in the back of your head. You're signing for $1 million from the government. You're walking around with it, and then you give it back when you're done. You see what I mean? These are unique people, and you can't just randomly hodgepodge increase the size of the special operations force. We don't have, that's not an everyday person.
Mike and I have talked about just general leadership before, and how there may not be as many leaders as we would like, that people who are born and wired to lead. And Mike, you were talking about luck. My grandfather was in World War II. He was in the Navy, and he actually lied about his age to go to war. And I remember asking him one time, why did you join the Navy? Like, you didn't and still don't know how to swim. Why'd you go in the Navy? And his response, I'll never forget it. He was a very practical man who said very little, but when he talked, you should listen to him. And he looked at me and he goes, I figured I had less of a chance of getting shot on a boat. I was like, yeah, okay, that's not luck. That's just sort of common sense. And just as a side note, Jack, I don't know if you remember this either, but when my grandfather died and we were preparing to go to his funeral, you said something to me that I don't think it sunk in until the moment hit, but you said that moment when the honor guard hands you his flag. And I don't remember the exact words. You probably know them.
On behalf of a grateful nation.
Yeah. And they hand that flag to my grandmother, in this case, was probably one of the most emotional moments I've ever had in my life. And part of it was it's just a somber moment and it's a serious moment, but it was also this recognition of this man who, like you've been talking about, Jack, he went above and beyond himself. He not only volunteered, but he lied just to get the opportunity to go volunteer because he wanted to go serve and to go fight and to do his part. And he came back from the war and he went to work in a factory that he worked in until the day he retired. And he married my grandmother and raised 2 kids. And that was what you did. And he was this amazing man who wasn't proud, like I guess maybe in a negative way. He wasn't overly proud of what he did. I think he was proud of his service, but it wasn't to the type of pride where he thought he was better than anybody else. It was just, this is what you do. It needed to be done, so I went and did it.
Yeah, similar to my grandfather, he was in the 10th Mountain Division in Italy in World War II on skis in the mountains.
Oh,
And same thing, he never really bragged or talked about it. He proudly, served, but never told stories.
yeah, I had an uncle who was in Vietnam, and he and another guy, I guess, had the video camera that they carried with them, and he had taken all of these videos, and some of them were quite brutal. And it was interesting because every once in a while, he would just lock himself in a room and he would rewatch those videos. He wouldn't talk about it, didn't want to talk about it, wouldn't answer questions about it. Just he went through the experience again, and that was his way of coping. And he got married, raised kids, lived a very productive and successful life. And that was just how he coped.
So the vast majority of that generation, called the greatest generation, were also drafted. Okay, so they were drafted in. So it wasn't their choice. That said, once they got there, it was a sense of, I've made up my mind, I'm going to do this, so I'm going to get it done. Again, if you look at Saving Private Ryan, his platoon sergeant had the sand or whatever in the little cans from his other battles. Once you went in, you weren't coming home till it was done. It's not like it's done today where you rotate back out, every 6 months or something like that. But that said, I would offer to you that with the number of draftees in that generation, and this is where I get into all kinds of trouble at the VFW, American Legion, Disabled American Veterans, were they truly the greatest generation? Because you described yourself, Eric, in this conversation, the young man with his family who was volunteering to go back. And this generation that, and I don't know if it's millennials or what it is. I don't have all those years figured out. I know the baby boomers, there's just a buttload of them, but everybody else I ain't got figured out yet. But they have, and there, I saw statistics, and it was compared to, they're like a badger. Once they get their teeth into something, they won't let go until it's done. Now they got to get their teeth into it, okay? But that's how, of course, the badger kills the bear. They get the teeth into it, the bear shakes the badger off, and the badger takes everything with him. right? Because that's how the Badgers fight. When we look at this generation, different than the generations prior. Example, or generations prior saw NASA put a man on the moon. This generation saw the blow up, right? The explosion and all the astronauts. So they don't have the inherent trust in institutions that prior generations had. But again, once you've earned their trust and earned their loyalty, and you're asking about leadership, that's one of the things in the military. Once you've earned it, they don't let go. They've got it, and they stick with it. And again, there were stat way back when where even at a 50% divorce rate, they kept going back, knowing they were going to get divorced. And divorces are very, very destructive to families and people and emotions and all that. But they kept going back, knowing I'm probably going to get a divorce. But it was taking care of that guy or gal and having the attitude that said, I don't want somebody else to have to fight my fight.
That client that I worked with, Jack, he said exactly that. He said, I cannot sit here in my warm, comfortable house changing diapers while my guys are over there putting their lives on the line.
And so the only reason I bring it up, they are also the greatest generation. I mean, the EST thing's only supposed to be one of them. Well, I would offer to you that this young generation today is the greatest generation. Old people, right? We get frustrated with them. We have to earn their trust and earn their loyalty. But once you earn it, it sticks.
Yeah.
It does. And so, Jack, would you recommend military service for today's young people? And if so, why?
Absolutely. In fact, I would offer to you there should be some kind of mandatory service. Now, we may not be military. Maybe it's mandatory service to the nation and you go build highways or bridges or whatever. But I think there should be mandatory service so that we understand that there's somebody on our left and right, and that what we do impacts them and what they do impacts us, and we have a responsibility to them. I think one of the things we've lost is that when something happens, it's somebody else's fault. Now, if you get in a car accident, I get it. Your car is damaged. Maybe the other guy's fault. But who's got to fix your car? You still have to take your car and go get it fixed. So even when something happens to you that you had no control over, I think, and this is what the military, I think, teaches, you have to take responsibility for it. And that's one of the big things I think we're losing is we are no longer responsible, not just for what we do, but also for what happens to us. Remember, again, our feelings. This is my humble opinion, that nobody pisses us off. Anger is an emotion we can choose. Oftentimes we've been taught that's how we're going to react to a situation. So to say, you pissed me off, I think that's a fallacy. You did something. I chose to react to it by getting pissed off.
I would argue that we feel the feelings that we feel. And I don't know how much control we have over the initial experience of feeling something in reaction to someone else or a situation. I think, though, what we have control over is what we're going to do with that. Are we going to let it drive us and control our behavior? And your point to maybe too much emphasis on feelings, and Mike, I don't know if we've talked about this before on the podcast or not, but even our language, our jargon in this country has changed. You notice how often people say, I feel like, and then they go on to describe something that's not an emotion at all.
It's not a feeling.
It's not a feeling. It's a thought. It's a belief. It's a whatever. But this concept of feelings has so overtaken our societal approach and reaction to everything that it's now ingrained in our language. Everything is about our feelings. And I see this, obviously I work in a profession that is driven by emotions, right? People come to see us because they're struggling with some aspect of their lives and they're struggling with their feelings about it. And we help them put that in its place and learn how to manage and be successful, often in spite of all of that. But even in my profession, I can't even tell you how often I tell somebody, those are just feelings. They don't have to, you don't have to do anything with them, about them, or for them. They're feelings. They're something you experience.
The feelings are legitimate. You have a choice. And you ask me the question, right? do you recommend people go in the military? So think about, let me share with you, how does the military train people? So when you're going through the basic training boot camp, right? They're forcing you to fail. Either you screwed up your bed, do push-ups, I'm going to yell at you. You didn't clean your room to standard, I'm going to yell at you. You didn't fire the rifle to standard, I'm going to yell at you. You didn't map read the way I wanted you to. You didn't do the drown proofing. You didn't do the whatever the training. They're forcing you to fail. Now, once you failed, you now have to get back up. You have to get back up and keep on going because you can't quit. Remember what I said about those values? Those people that quit, well, they go home. They never adopted those values. Remember what I said? It said in here that somehow I make up my mind I'm going to do that. So that's what the training does. And I think that has a lot to do with the real world today. Heard of this saying, right? If you have a cup of coffee and you're walking along and somebody bumps into you and you spill the coffee, why did you spill the coffee?
Because you weren't holding it tight enough.
Most people will say because somebody bumped into you, but it's actually, here's a perspective. You spilled the coffee because you could put coffee in the coffee cup. What if you'd put tea in it? Then you would have spilled the tea. In other words, what we fill ourselves up with is what spills out when we get bumped into. That's what the military is doing, right? They're going to bump into you. They're going to force you to fail at things and then overcome it, because that's kind of how life is. All of us get bumped into. Life bumps into us. We can't help it. And if we're going to blame, you spilled my coffee, instead of saying, oh, I put coffee in there, maybe I should put tea in there. What do we fill ourselves up with every day so that when life bumps into us, what spills out?
You're describing resilience, right? Teaching the soldiers to be resilient. And yet the flip side of that the piece that doesn't make sense to me is the suicide rate that you see in veterans. And we know in our profession that resilience is the number one mitigating factor for suicide.
I would go back to what I'd said when you asked me about that. They had the emotional problems when they came into the service.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So those seeds were already planted. And they weren't able to clean all those out. Remember what I'm saying here isn't, nothing's perfect. Nothing's an absolute, right? We're not going to do the absolutes. So the things happen and they never actually fixed all that stuff.
Right.
True story, right? End of my plebe year, the first year at West Point, a classmate hung themselves in their closet. And it's like, what happened? And the story, as I understand it, was that he had not done well and was quitting. And the parents told him, "Don't come home if you quit."
Oh, yeah, that'll do it.
And so that's how he chose to handle that.
Yeah. I was reading about PTSD, and they said the same thing in this article. Was a lot of soldiers who've got PTSD had issues prior to the military, and that sets them up for a higher chance of having PTSD. Kind of what you're saying.
Remember when I said I raised that money, so I got to sit down with lots of psychologists. They had the PTS, the post-traumatic stress. Because of the other things that had happened, it becomes the disorder in their life also.
Right.
Again, I humbly believe we all have post-traumatic stress. Things happen, right? We don't want to go back to that corner where we saw an accident or where we were in an accident, right? We have things we just don't want to do. And if we don't deal with those and move past it, it doesn't mean you ever have to go to the corner, but that's when it becomes the disorder. And if the family issues, right? All that kind of stuff.
Yeah, makes sense.
Maybe.
Yeah, we talk in our profession, you look at the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. And I think people, the perfect example is alcohol or drug abuse disorders. I know lots of people who drink every day and drink a lot every day, and I wouldn't classify them as alcoholics. I know people who only drink every once in a while, and they're raging alcoholics. And what we look at is not necessarily the symptoms, or we don't look at the symptoms alone, maybe. It's not how often do you drink and do you go through withdrawal and all of that, but it's also the effect on functioning. Are you getting in trouble with the law? Are you skipping work? Are you having relationship problems? Are you not going to school because of your substance use?
And Jack, what you're describing is exactly the same thing. It is we all have post-traumatic stress. We all have these things we've gone through in life, whether we're in the military or not. It's whether or not it gets to that level of us no longer being able to function the way that we should. That guy I talked about who couldn't pump gas in his car, perfectly functional individual who works and is very successful and is a great family man and husband. And he has this one area of his life where he's had to find a coping behavior. And the coping behavior is have someone else pump his gas. It's not that big of a deal. But I wouldn't. And that's the thing he talked about, like when he tried to do it over and over again, it was the flashbacks and the guilt and all this other stuff that he said, I couldn't function when I was feeling that way. And so I don't do that anymore. And that's I think the strength that I see, even the veterans that I've seen in counseling, the strength that they have to manage what they've been through, the things that they've seen that the rest of us should thank God every day we haven't had to see and experience. But the strength to say, okay, I went through that. It had an impact on me. It may still have an impact on me. And yet, in spite of all of that, I will continue to serve and function and be the person I need to be.
Because what might he do if he pumped the gas? And that's what he doesn't want to do, is go to that place. And I would offer to you, maybe I'm interpreting wrong, but the guy you tell with the gas, he's taking responsibility for his feelings and he's taking an action. He's not going to get out and pump the gas. And he's done something about it. He's not dishing it on somebody else or handing it to somebody else. Back to, why should people join the military? Or no, it was, Jack, do you think people should join the military? Yes. If you want to learn how to be resilient, yes, I think you should join the military, because that's how they train you. Basic training. I don't care. It is about forcing you to fail. And then once you've failed, overcome it.
Yeah. Very cool. Mike, we wrap up every episode with a takeaway. What's your takeaway today?
Oh, I have so much respect for anybody who serves in the military. My dad was in the Air Force during Vietnam. He fortunately did not have to go to Vietnam. They sent him to Newfoundland. And he likes to tell the story that not one Viet Cong got through Newfoundland. So he's very proud of that. But anyway, I have so much respect for the military. And it's also something I just really don't even understand, because I never served myself. The PTSD part, that was something I looked at before we met tonight. And I think Jack also agrees with this, that there's so much more than just what happened in combat or what happened in the military that leads to PTSD. The point Eric was making was, if resilience is what they're teaching, what's with the suicide rate? I think we talked through that, which kind of clarifies, it's not just about the service. It's the whole life and just being a human being. But yeah, thanks for enlightening us, Jack.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for being here, and thank you for allowing us to pay for your service. we appreciate
it. Can I give you two things I hope get taken away?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
One, PTS, it's okay to talk about it. Now, you may want to find the right person to talk about it, but if you've got that going on in your life, find somebody to talk to. It's okay to talk about it. And the second one is, I would offer to you, we're not victims. Veterans are not victims. I'd offer you a young lady that you both know. She's in your state. Her name's Tammy Duckworth. Now, she didn't lose. She gave 2 legs. Remember, she volunteered to be a pilot. And I think if you talked to her, and I met her, I knew her back in the day, she gave 2 legs to her nation, but she did not sit around crying in her Wheaties like Lieutenant Dan did. Remember in the movie, right? Lieutenant Dan's crying in his Wheaties.
Yeah.
She went out and became a senator.
Yeah.
A senator and a mom.
Yeah.
Right? And so when you talk about resilience, that's what I hope we're not victims. We're honored. If you want to say thanks, go for it. But we're not victims. Okay, so don't victimize us. And from post-traumatic stress, it's okay. Find somebody to talk about it. You don't have to keep it all inside your head.
All right. Lieutenant Colonel Jack Amberg, retired. Thank you. Thank you for your time, your expertise, and despite the jokes, thank you for the service you gave us.
Absolutely.
You got it. Thanks for paying for it, and I'm proud to be a born-again civilian.
Take care, guys.
Thanks.